Welcome to the Adapt Performance Podcast, the podcast that lets you delve into the minds of world-class guests all involved in the pursuit of performance. I'm your host, Jordan Webster, and let's get into it. Yes, guys, what is going on? So I'm back with another Q&A type episode today. So last week I put something out on Instagram and a few people kind of fired in some suggestions and some topics and some specific scenarios that they would essentially like my opinion on, which is always nice. You know, I know it doesn't take long to throw in a question, but it's always a little bit mind-blowing that people want to know my thoughts on things. Back for that. I've just been back from a meeting with a few of the guys from Sheffield Basketball. So we're starting our pre-season next week, actually. So Sheffield Basketball is a college program that I work with. And we're basically just ironing out a little bit of the test that we're going to be using, how we're going to approach the scheduling and all those types of things, which has been good. It's been a good morning. I always enjoy those types of things because you can tell everyone's really enthusiastic. Everyone's really buzzing to get stuck into the season, you know, speaking through some of our aims and how we're actually going to get there with the players. So it's been cool. And then stopped off to get a Dunkin' Donuts, get a cold brew on the way. So hopefully today I can give you my best caffeinated self. What else has been going on? That's it, actually. So this morning I spent quite a lot of time trying to ring different gyms in Sheffield. So as some of you may know, I work with some downhill mountain bikers, which is cool, but it's really cool. Unfortunately, one of our guys, Matt Walker, had a crash probably 2 weeks ago. Pretty bad crash. So kind of put him out of being able to compete for that day. So he fractured his patella, so his kneecap. He also fractured the tip of his middle finger. And, you know, obviously a little bit of a nightmare for him because we've got a few more races left this season. So how we're kind of approaching it from like a full performance team is really cool. You know, I think everyone's kind of all hands on deck to make sure that we can get him back to where we need him sooner rather than later. And from like an S&C standpoint, so he's in a brace. Okay, so he's got about 30 degrees of flexion that he's allowed to get, so he can go straight leg, and then he can bend it 30 degrees. So he's got a little bit, but he ain't got a lot. He's on crutches. You know, essentially, you know, looking at the healing time for bone in the lower leg or lower body, you're looking at 6 to 8 weeks before they're really happy for you to start loading it again. So yeah, that's kind of what we're working towards, is the fact that he's got 6 to 8 weeks of prescribed resting time. But we have 2 races left of the season, I believe. One is in 3 weeks and one is, I think, maybe 4 or 5 weeks. So we're going to see. You know, I think if this wasn't a professional rider, you know, and there wasn't more on the line, if he was more recreational based, the advice generally would be, you know, we're just going to wait. And that still might be the advice based off how his progression goes. But, you know, when we kind of get into the pro sport realm, there's definitely elements of, okay, we need to get results. We need to get better, essentially. So in terms of from an S&C standpoint, I'm going off on one. Look, I'm not even a quarter way through the coffee and I've gone off on a tangent. So from an S&C standpoint, then it's a really interesting time. You know, he's getting loads of physio just to basically try and loosen up any tight muscles, scar tissue, get cryotherapy, get everything involved just to try and speed up the healing process and get rid of the swelling. But yeah, from an S&C standpoint, what I'm looking at doing is implementing something called cross-education effect. So basically, it is, if you have an injured side, we are going to work on strengthening the non-injured side, okay? And the benefits for this is essentially the brain can't always differentiate between left and right when it comes to adaptations. So by strengthening his good side, we're going to allow a certain amount of those strength adaptations to go to his bad side, which sounds like witchcraft. It sounds like pure wizardry, and it is a little bit, actually. So yeah, that is what we're going to be working on. We're going to get his good leg really, really strong. We're going to hammer that. The research is a little bit mixed, actually. You know, there's not tons of research in that. There's more in like stroke populations and things like that, because that's generally the type of training they will do. You know, when you've got one side of your body that is full, you know, atrophizing, whatever. Somebody can let me know what the actual word for that is. But when you're losing muscle mass on a injured limb because you essentially can't move it, that's what we'll do. Okay, so we're going to get his good leg really, really strong. That will make the rehab on his bad leg a lot quicker because he's going to have a lot more strength to play with. And that is one of the big strengths of S&C anyway. You know, it's all great having the performance benefits, but ultimately what you're allowing yourself to do is when you do get injured, you make that bounce back a lot easier. You know, you make sure that when you do get back into training and you're approaching that return to play stage of post rehab, that you're in a better situation. You're not just going to get re-injured, because that is the thing. Like, re-injury rate is high. It's higher for certain injuries than it is for others. But yeah, so that is one thing we're going to be working on. And yeah, the research side of it is mixed. You know, so strength gain happens through a few different mechanisms. Okay, so you've got like the central nervous system, you've got your brain, you've got the spinal cord, which basically is getting your motor units to switch on, is getting the synchronization of all your muscle groups to basically haul ass to get the exercise done. So you've got the CNS, the central nervous system's effect. You've also got the actual muscular adaptation that happens from strength training. You know, so you're getting the increase in muscle fibers, you're getting more muscle mass essentially. And the research is mixed, and they essentially are getting at that you want to tick it from both boxes. If you're trying to improve central nervous system and how neurally efficient you are, you would do lower reps, higher weight. If you're trying to basically build more muscle mass, you generally go a little bit the opposite way. You do higher reps with lower weight. But what we're doing with Matt is we're doing both. Okay, so I'm going to see him twice this week. We're going to have a higher volume leg press day for the good leg. We're going to do some seated hamstring curls as well. So yeah, higher volume on that day. And then on the other day, we're going to do a lower volume, higher intensity. So we'll lift some heavier weights, probably around 5 reps, 6 reps, that type of thing. And then we'll do some leg extensions and some calf raises, and some other kind of lower body bits just to make sure we're balanced. We'll also do a bunch of core stuff. You know, I think a lot of people could benefit from doing more core stuff, but I think as a mountain biker, they all love it. You know, they feel like it really helps them get control over the bike, you know, ride the bike rather than be a passenger of the bike. So those small little movements around the hips when they are riding down a mountain at 55 kilometers an hour is huge. So yeah, that's how we're going to kind of approach it. And then from an upper body standpoint, just in terms of like how we've approached this problem solving, you know, we want to make sure that we're still keeping muscle mass there. You know, again, from an injury prevention standpoint of, look, if he does end up falling off his bike in the future, we don't want him to have a weaker side. But because he's broke his finger, so he's broke his middle finger, gripping is a nightmare. So he can't really grip anything on that side, can't really press anything on that side just because of the way it's sat, and it's still getting a little bit of, you know, inflammation and just general bad feelings around that hand. So we're going to use a lot of machine work. Okay, machine work is, I'm just a big fan anyway. There's a little bit of a misconception that free weights are superior to machines, and it's not necessarily the way. We won't really go into that today, but we're going to use a lot of machine works because it's easier to kind of maneuver himself into position, just so we can get a little bit of a nicer feel through the hand. And then I got him to order some of those hooks. Okay, so you can get some hooks from Amazon, you can get them from wherever, but it wraps around your wrist like a wrist wrap. Okay, but then it has an iron hook which basically comes on the inside of your palm. Okay, and what that basically does is it hooks onto a barbell, allows you to put your fingers over the top of it for support, but you're not really using your hand as a flexi, you're not gripping, which is going to be really useful for him. So we can get a decent amount of pull work in there as well. So we can train both limbs upper body wise. We're just going to need to get a little bit more creative. Where was I going with that one? So yeah, we've got Matt in this week. So I was ringing some different gyms this morning. The gym that I usually do a lot of my coaching out of is generally more of a free weight based gym. We do have a cable machine, but I want a little bit more variation than that, just to get the most benefit really. So yeah, anyway, that's my life story. So moving on to the actual questions then. So I had quite a few questions this time, which was awesome actually. So I've saved a few of them. I'll probably do another Q&A in a couple of weeks, and then see if anybody's kind of added to it or wants me to elaborate on any of the bollocks that I end up saying, because I'm sure I will get into it a little bit. So the first one then is, I'm paraphrasing the actual question, and I'm going to make a lot of assumptions of what they actually mean, but essentially this is from Kerry around plateauing. Okay, so reach a plateau in her training. What would be my advice for essentially busting through that? Okay, and plateaus are an interesting one, and I think how I kind of want to start this is from the theory side of things. So when it comes to plateaus, then, so there's a few different things we can kind of think about. And one of the theories I want to kind of draw upon is the fitness fatigue model. Okay, so the fitness fatigue model basically explains how the body acclimates to stress, okay, and how it deals with what we impose on it as trainers, as athletes. And basically, when you go in the gym, okay, you're going to cause a certain amount of fatigue. You're going to go in and you're going to knock yourself out. Okay, you're going to lift heavy. You're going to do all those things, and immediately post-workout, you are a little bit worse. Okay, so all of your markers in terms of performance, your strength, your power, your neuromuscular efficiency, your aerobic capacity, all those things will be lower, providing that you did an effective workout that's trying to stimulate. Okay, so at the end of the session, you have caused fatigue. Okay, so you've dipped into a little bit of a hole there. You've also caused a little bit of fitness. Okay, so the fitness fatigue model. Fitness in this case isn't necessarily just thinking about cardiovascular fitness. It is applying to all physical qualities. Okay, so when I say fitness, I just mean general physical qualities. And as soon as you finish that workout, pretty much as soon as you finish that first set, you are now trying to recover from that stress that you've just caused. Over time, session after session, week after week, month after month, that fatigue is going to build up a little bit, okay? Providing that you don't manage to get in that perfect balance of apply a stressor, recover, apply a stressor, recover, you will start to accumulate a little bit more fatigue, and you will hold that fatigue all the time, okay? So you're always going to be kind of dipping a little bit below your 100% whilst your fitness is going up. So you'll get to a point where you almost feel like what is happening is you're getting worse or it's stalling. And that might happen. You may go in the gym and you may not be able to lift the same weights that you were lifting before. You may lose a rep. You may not be able to jump as high, run as fast, all those different things. That may happen. And it's not always just because you are getting worse. Chances are it's because the fatigue is kind of covering the new fitness or adaptation effect that you have caused. And there's a saying around fatigue masks fitness. Okay, so my advice most of the time is generally you need to have a little bit of a deload. Okay, have a little bit of a deload. You know, take a week where you reduce some of the sessions by a third. You know, so cut out some of the volume. You can either trim your accessories at the end. You can, instead of doing 3 sets of an exercise, you do 2 sets. You know, you've got some options there, but generally a deload for about a week is enough to get rid of some of that CNS fatigue that you've caused, some of that peripheral fatigue that you have caused, you know, so actually at a muscular level, getting rid of some of that kind of waste product buildup and that general feeling of tiredness. So yeah, I think the other side of things is when you are actually causing fatigue, there's a few different types of fatigue. There's central nervous system fatigue, just generally feeling a bit drained. Okay, so that's the first one. It's just feeling like you're not firing on all cylinders. You're a little bit, yeah, that type of thing. The second one is peripheral fatigue. So peripheral fatigue for me is talking about what's actually happening at the muscular level. You know, so the waste products that we're building up, all those types of things. You know, the metabolites that you get from training, that feeling of shit, my muscles are burning, that type of thing. So that causes a certain amount of fatigue. And then there's the muscle damage side of things. Okay. So muscle damage, you know, not all the time, but sometimes when we go in the gym, our objective will be that we are having some form of muscle damage as a byproduct of us chasing a certain adaptation. And it's essentially for all of those things, the best thing to do is have a little bit of a rest. Okay. It's take a little bit of an opportunity to take some time off, to give your body a little bit of an opportunity to soak up some of those adaptations, to really kind of reset a little bit. The other side of things, going into this plateau is I think as you get more and more well-trained, gains are going to come so much slower. You're not going to be able to walk into the gym and add 5 kilo to a lift. You're going to have to work a lot harder for them. So you may gain a rep every 2 weeks. You may only add half a kilo every 2 weeks. That isn't necessarily a plateau. It just means you're having to work harder because you are more well-trained. That's not a bad thing. It just means you need to be a little bit smarter in the way that you actually approach gaining strength, gaining power, or getting more athletic. We need to be more structured. So the other side of this is, going back to that deload piece, is when you deload, yes, you are kind of getting rid of fatigue. I would say for me, that is probably one of the quickest and easiest ways, to actually kind of get yourself back to baseline, is deload in some way. But when you deload, what you're doing as well is you're resensitizing the body. Okay. So you're giving your body an opportunity to take some time away from the stimulus that you have been applying. Okay. And then when you reintroduce the stimulus, it now sees it as this new thing. Okay. It sees it as a training tool that you haven't done in a little while. So now it's really receptive again. Okay. If we factor this into caffeine or alcohol, when you take a little bit of time away from those things and then you reintroduce having a coffee, you get a bit of a buzz. Whereas, you could have had 3 coffees beforehand and got nothing. The body's a really kind of effective machine. I don't refer to the body as a machine too often, but in this example, it's really useful because it is clever. Okay. If you keep applying the same stimulus time after time after time, it's going to get used to it. It's going to stop responding to it as much. It's not going to be as alarmed, which then forces you to adapt to that. Actually, there's a few things I want to touch on with plateau. So if we take powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting, it can get really repetitive when you're constantly hammering away at that same stone of trying to push the number up half a kilo, a rep. It gets really challenging mentally because you're going to have to work super hard. So sometimes you need a little bit of variation, a little bit of time away from the actual competition exercise, or a little bit of a opportunity to do something slightly different as part of your training can be enough to give that mental boost to get through and make that plateau feeling actually not be a plateau, so more of a psychological element to it. The other side of a plateau is what is actually going on the other side of training, So great, your training could be amazing. You're doing 5 days a week, 1 hour a day, but are you sleeping enough? Okay. Are you managing all the external stresses? Have you got kids? Do they keep you up? Are they stressful? Are they getting told off at school all the time? Is work a pain in the ass for you? Are you having relationship troubles? All those things go into the same cup. Okay. And eventually, whether we like it or not, that does have an impact on whether you can go into the gym and lift as hard and recover as well. Okay. So thinking about it from a holistic nature, can you take care of some of those other things if you are in that kind of plateau stage? Be honest with yourself. Are you actually taking care of those nuts and bolts? All right. Yeah. So that's plateau then. Few things for you to kind of think about. Okay, moving on to the next question. Bloody hell, sorry, that was a big slurp. I'll probably edit that out. It's getting to that point with like this straw. It's obviously a paper straw, and I know everyone kind of feels the same thing about these. I love what it's doing for the environment, but if you have that straw in your drink for longer than 10 minutes, it's just mush. Like I'm getting no liquid out of that. That wasn't a question, but. So question 2 then is going on to something that I'm not an expert in, but I can definitely give my perspective on is online coaching. Okay. And trying to venture into the online coaching world as an S&C coach. What are my thoughts? What are some of my learnings? What are some of the things I've done well and not done well? And the follow-up question to this was, how do you compete in a market that seems to be, it was a long question. Essentially, what are my thoughts on online coaching, how to get into it, and how do I cope when trying to differentiate myself when there seems to be a lot of lesser educated coaches doing super well with marketing and branding? So yeah, it was a paragraph of a question. And I can give you my perspective. I think whether we like it or not, branding and marketing and all those things is a part of business. Okay. Whether you like it or not, it is a part of business. Gary V, he speaks, he's not somebody I get all my kind of motivational info from, but he speaks about businesses. If you are in the pen business, okay, you're in the pen business, but you're also in the media business, because the only way you're going to get clients is through media, referrals, word of mouth, all those things. You don't just want to attack it from one point of view. And I agree with that, and it happens on a little bit of a continuum. You don't need to be all in. You don't need to, I push a lot on social media. I put a lot of stuff out there, but you don't necessarily need to have a successful business. I have a lot of friends that have really successful online businesses that don't necessarily have a huge social media engagement. They don't push it a lot or anything like that. I know where they're kind of going with this question in terms of the lesser educated people. And this is something I've kind of spoke about a little bit, and it sounds pompous when you say lesser educated, but that's not necessarily what we're getting at. I think it's people that have had a lot of experience as an S&C coach in the real world. I'll just call it the real world and not the social media world. They've worked with a lot of teams, they've worked with a lot of athletes, they've been in the trenches, they've been on the gym floor and actually working with people. And now there's people just going straight to the online coaching world as their first step without actually having all the information behind them to actually make educated calls. And I agree, I think, so I heard a really cool quote the other day, literally on this topic around online coaching and how, generally you want to get a coach, a strength and conditioning coach, a PT that has worked with people before online. And he used it as his example was watching a shitload of porn doesn't make you a good shagger. And I was like, okay, fair. It makes perfect sense. You can do all the reading in the world. You can do all the research in the world. You can do all the lab work in the world. But ultimately, you're going to have to go out and do the thing. You're going to have to go out and coach people to get really good at coaching people. And I agree. I think I would always be cautious of people that don't look like they've actually coached people in the real world. But, I'm probably not in the business of actually hiring an S&C coach. So I don't know what people respond to too well in that. So yeah, I think from this, you need to do a good job of branding. Honestly, I think for me, the best way of going about it is probably paying somebody to take care of the branding and marketing side. Okay. Or at least kind of try to outsource certain things that you find you can't do as well. The saying of do what you do best and then delegate the rest kind of rings true here. If you're a really good coach and you're really good at working with people, you're really good at kind of that building interaction and getting results, great, do that. Put your energy into that thing because that will differentiate you from other people. But if you're not too savvy on, Adobe Pro, if you're not great on Canva and you don't have that creative eye, get somebody on board to kind of help you with that, designing logos, color schemes, how are you putting your adverts out there, all those things. So yeah, I think there's something to kind of think about. And I think for me, I wouldn't necessarily bother worrying about what other people are doing, focus on what you're doing. Okay. Get your shit done, get your ducks in a row, get them aligned, make sure that your package and the way you're presenting yourself and your service is bang on. And just don't worry about all the other people doing stuff. So yeah, there's a little bit on online coaching then. So let's kind of move on to the next bit, which is, okay, so next question. I had a question from Toby and I gave him a little bit of advice on this, or at least my thoughts on this over Instagram, but I thought I'd kind of elaborate here because maybe somebody that's kind of facing that same issue. And it's around tendinopathy or tendinitis. It goes by a few different names depending on essentially how clinical you want to be about it. But tendinopathy, tendinitis, tendinosis, they are different things. But Toby was basically curious what my thoughts were on elbow pain in pressing activities. Okay. And it was overhead press. And Toby's a strong man, does a little bit of powerlifting, type training, just general kind of traditional strength training, but, is really kind of pushing, competes, does all those things. And yeah, he gets elbow pain and it's around the bicep, and he was curious on my thoughts. And I think sharing a little bit of my own perspective, a little bit of my own experience with tendinitis in the past. And I used to get it on the inside of my elbow, so the medial aspect of my elbow, which would be classified as golfer's. Okay, so I had golfer's elbow. And for me, it was 100% caused by back squats, actually. So I used to try and low bar squat. So basically where the bar just sits a little bit lower down on your upper back, just so you can basically get it in a more comfortable position. It allows you to lean forward slightly more and not feel the strength decrease effects of it being not as advantageous from a leverage standpoint. So yeah, I used to low bar squat, which is a little bit more challenging for the shoulders. And as a result, because the shoulders can't get into that position as well, they can't externally rotate. Your elbow generally is the victim of that. So that was my issue. And it used to be flared up from squats, but then used to be aggravated more so when I used to do a lot of pressing, a lot of pulling as part of that. So if we look at my example, it was the elbow was the victim, but it was not the culprit. It was not the person doing the thing. So I worked on shoulder mobility. Okay, allowed myself to get into a little bit more of a nicer low bar position, which helped a lot. I did a lot of warming up before the exercises. That helped a lot. But ultimately, it took me having to take a little bit of a step away from the activity that was hurting it to let it recover, just a little bit of rest, nothing too long. I actually just changed variation. I went to more of a high bar squat and a little bit more front squat because that was pain-free. And that helped a lot. What you want to think about is, why is this happening? Why are you getting that pain? Okay. And generally, if it's an elbow problem, it's because of something that's going on at the wrist, or it's something that's going on at the shoulder or the T-spine. So you want to try and free up those areas. Okay. You want to give yourself an opportunity to free up those areas so that your elbow can do what the elbow needs to do without the elbow being exposed to these really high forces that is causing the tendons to then get aggro, essentially. So yeah, looking at your T-spine, looking at a little bit of breathing stuff. How is that all working for you? Do your shoulders move well? Can you get into a nice overhead position? Can you get into a nice rack position? Is it because you've gone from doing not a lot to doing a lot? Okay. Is it a loading issue? All those things definitely can come into it. Some of the things that really kind of helped me in the short term when I was trying to battle through it and finish off the training program was voodoo flossing. So if you haven't heard of voodoo flossing, I believe it was like popularized by Kelly Starrett. So like the Supple Leopard guy does a lot in CrossFit and ROMWOD and all those things. Essentially what you do is you get the joint that is basically playing up. It can be your knee, your shoulder. I'm like, can you do it for your shoulder? I think it's best for like knees, elbows, that type of thing. A joint where you can basically wrap something up really, really tightly. And what you use is they sell specific voodoo flossing stuff. We used to use resistance bands. And you basically just tie up the joint really, really tight in this elastic substance. You can use like bike inner tubes and stuff as well. Tie it up really, really tight. Okay. And then start to move it, get somebody to force it through that range of motion. It's really painful. It's horrible. It rips your skin. It's not great. But then when you take it off, you get a sudden rush of blood to that area. I think it also does a job of loosening up the structures and the tissues around that joint that is hurting. So in case of your elbow, it would be loosening up some of the forearm flexors and extensors, all that mass around there, your bicep, your tricep, giving it a little bit more length because you've then pinned it in place, pin the muscle in place and then still try to stretch it and take it through some range of motion. So you get a little bit more length through those tissues, which does provide a little bit of relief. So it's a really, really painful thing to do, the actual voodoo flossing process. But once you take it off, you can then do the activity generally pretty pain-free. So it's not a solution. It's not a long-term solution by any means, but it definitely does give you a little bit of immediate relief so that you can do the training session. I'm going to caveat all this with, I'm not a medical professional. My advice would always be go to a physio, a sports therapist, somebody who you trust that can diagnose what is going wrong, okay, and can give you some specialized advice on how to get that better. That is always going to be my advice. Make sure you just get that stuff taken care of. You know, I know it always costs money. I know that's usually people's thoughts is, oh, it's 45 quid. Am I going to have to do a 10-week course? Yeah, maybe, you know, or you can just keep putting up with the pain. And that's it. You know, you've got a choice. But yeah, that's some of my experience around that. When it comes to knees and Achilles and all those things, isometrics are really good, you know, and I imagine it'll probably be similar for those specific issues. I managed to just get away from the actual exercise that was hitting it, and it went away. And I just never returned to it because I didn't need to do low bar squat. I was just doing it because it was there at the time. But when you start working with knees and Achilles, like I said, isometrics, long duration isometrics are really good for tendon pain. It just allows you to basically create an adaptation where there is a slow healing effect of that tendon. Okay. It's not going to solve all things. And like I said, go to a medical professional just to make sure you're getting the best person on the job for that, not just trusting some northern geezer who does a podcast. All right. I want to wrap it up there. I'm not actually too sure how long I've been going, but that is a quick, short and sweet Q&A, hopefully for you. If you enjoy these types of episodes, let me know. I will do them in the future if people like them. If they don't like them, then, you know, I won't bother. I'll kind of save these kind of chats for maybe Instagram and those other things. But as always, like the podcast is a nice little project for me at the moment. I'm really enjoying doing it. And just hearing whether you are actually valuing that, and if it's teaching you anything, if it's giving you something to kind of draw upon in your own training or your own coaching, just let me know. But yeah, as always, thank you very much, and I will speak to you soon. Thanks for listening to the Adapt Performance podcast. Let me know what you thought about the episode by leaving a review or sending me a direct message. I'm all for receiving the honest feedback to make sure the episodes grow and get better and better. Like, share, subscribing and following all goes a long way to making sure the podcast reaches the right people. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.